Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hey listeners, thanks for joining me again for the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ, and today is part 2 of designing a academy PT program. Now, I'm going to try to stay organized today, but man, I have notes on my phone. I have a handout. I have so many different things I'm going to be referring to. So let's wish me luck. Let's just start there. I want to acknowledge again, in part 1, we talked about mostly an academy that would be in a college setting. So these are students, they are paying to take the academy. It's a little bit different than these are your new employees. So full acknowledgement in the first episode. That was the primary gist of what we were talking about. But in this second part, most of what I'm going to talk about is really translatable to agency academies. And so I wanted to start with I do not know this individual personally, but I'm going to meet him in a couple weeks. His name is Pat Basil, and he works for Special Warfare. And he put up a kind of a post on LinkedIn the other day. And he said, common across 99% of the bad programs I see, number 1, too many exercises. Number 2, too much volume. Number 3, no regard for exercise order. Number 4, exercise selection based on nothing. Number 5, too much random and total disregard for the bodies of the participants. And number 6, not enough effort to learn the basics. Freaking men. I see this all the time. Again, we talked about arbitrariness in the last episode or the first part of this, and I just see so much arbitrary programming. It just, I don't know, it irritates my demons. So we're going to talk a lot about that today, but I also want to talk about this whole concept of train like you play. And so I see this all the time, like, yeah, brother, great workout, train like you play. And I look at what they're doing, and they're doing something like medicine ball V-ups in full turnout gear, followed by pull-ups, followed by the assault bike in full turnout gear. And again, if you're going to train like you play, we most definitely do not do activities like that on the fire ground. And so not too long ago, just a couple weeks ago, there was another one of these, sort of like putting on bunker gear and then just doing arbitrary fitness things. And someone commented, like, train like you play. And then he continued, we used to put on our bunker gear and play volleyball with a 20-pound medicine ball in the Arizona heat. We'll just let it sink in. I can't. That is not training like you play. That is asking for an injury while being arbitrary. Okay, so where we kind of left off last time on the episode, I talked about the qualities that we needed to train in firefighters, the qualities that were important for performance, and that included muscular strength, power and endurance, cardiorespiratory capacity, mobility and stability, mental fortitude, of course, very important, body composition, and also energy systems that are able to ebb and flow and rise to the demand of what we're going to be doing. And we talked about applying the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demands to drive meaningful and job-specific progress. And so if we can just take a step back, anytime we're programming for an academy, anytime we're programming for ourselves, if we can take a step back and say, what adaptation am I trying to drive right now? And let that be your North Star, your guiding light, whatever you want to call it. What adaptation are we trying to drive? I think it makes it a little bit more clear when we are choosing exercises to put in our program. I want to remind you of a couple things. This is really important. So we have all those qualities that we want to train, but we also need to keep this in mind. Non-contact injuries tend to happen while we're decelerating or changing direction. And so decelerating would be stepping down off of the rig. It would be we're pulling a hose line and all of a sudden we need to stop. Change of direction would be moving to the side or forward, backward to get out of the way. So injuries tend to happen while we're decelerating or changing direction. And so don't you think it might be a good idea to put some of that training in your Recruit Academy programming? So deceleration, things as simple as box step downs under control. Deceleration, we can do acceleration runs, and then we can practice the deceleration part of that run. Change of direction. We can do an acceleration, and then we can do a cut to one side or the other. We need these recruits to not have to, on the very first time they actually step off a rig, be the first time they've ever decelerated. We need to train them for it. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that pain and injuries often occur in the transverse plane. And so transverse is that rotational plane. And so a few years ago, there was this big push against we should not load rotation. Loading rotation is very, very dangerous. And then the pendulum went the other way, and then we're doing Russian twists with a 50-pound medicine ball, completely out of control. And then the pendulum swung again, like we should not load rotation. Well, here's the thing, gang. We need these recruits to not have the first time they ever see loaded rotation be when Grandma Ethel is laying in the bathroom, wet and slippery and overweight and needing to get up and out of that bathroom. We do not want that first time recruits ever have to load their rotation to be then. And I'm not saying that we need to, again, aggressively train Russian twists. Is there a time and a place for a controlled Russian twist? I think there probably is. But we need to be training these recruits how to be able to offset their feet and load, pick up a patient with offset feet, rotating with control so that they're not hurting themselves. Last thing that we need to remember is that pain and injuries tend to occur in areas that should be stable but aren't. So the areas of the body that should be stable are the knee, the lower back, portions of the shoulder complex. Those things should be stable. And because our ankles and our hips and our thoracic spine are incredibly stiff in most people, then we start to substitute motion in those areas that should be stable. And so keep that in mind. We don't want the first time someone decelerates, the first time someone changes direction, or the first time someone has to rotate in a loaded state to be out in the world, and we haven't taught them how to do it. So here's a few additional considerations for your programming before we really dive into some of the maybe safety aspects of things. Now, J-Dawes and I were on a few episodes ago. We talked about the data I gathered from OSU OKC Fire Training Academy this spring. And what we're doing is we're using that data that we gathered to inform our decision making and make program adjustments. And so here's the thing. Our programming that we use, my programming that I put together that we used at OSU OKC was very, very effective for what we had available to us. And so we saw significant improvements in 1.5-mile run time, significant improvements in body composition and skeletal muscle mass, even though we only had 40-pound sandbags, pull-up bars, a couple of tires, a couple of sledgehammers. And so that, to me, would I have loved to see those recruits, candidates, students, whatever you want to call them, get a lot stronger? Yeah, I mean, some of them were pretty strong already. But would I have loved to improve everyone's strength? Of course, but there's only so much that you can do with 40-pound sandbag. And so keep that in mind. We are looking for specific adaptations to the demands that we impose. And if we are imposing fictional demands, such as playing volleyball with a 20-pound medicine ball in your gear in the Arizona heat, I don't know what to say about that. Because here's the thing, as a coach, if someone gets hurt doing that, I can't defend it. If someone gets hurt while I'm trying to teach them to load and rotate or to decelerate or to change direction, again, I'm going to feel horrible as a coach, but I can justify what I was doing. If someone gets hurt playing 20-pound medicine volleyball in their gear in the heat, I can't justify it because that's just stupid. I'm going to say it. That's stupid. I also want to talk to you a little bit about using exercise as punishment. And I have talked on the podcast a few times about this. And it's a difficult topic because we want to teach our recruits or our students or whatever you want to call them, our employees, our candidates. We want to teach them discipline, but I think sometimes in an effort to teach the discipline, sometimes we dole out exercise as a punishment in a way that doesn't make sense. And we have to be really, really cognizant of heat-related illnesses, because when we're looking at, using physical activity as a disciplinary tool, it can not only undermine long-term motivation and culture, but it can directly cause heat-related illnesses. And so when we're looking at heat-related illnesses, we're looking at dehydration, which causes performance impacts as well as cognitive impacts. And so even just like 1% to 2% dehydration can cause cognitive impacts. And so when we're looking at using exercise as a punishment in the heat, we have to be so cognizant of dehydration, because a minor heat-related illness is this kind of a spectrum. We go kind of maybe from a heat rash. Sometimes people get heat edema, so they start to pool blood in their extremities. That can go on to heat cramps, and sometimes syncopal episodes where someone actually passes out because of dehydration and heat. Those are minor. Then we get into the major, which would include heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And so when we're looking at these heat-related illnesses, we need to look at the following things: proper training. So our comprehensive training programs, are they gradually increasing intensity and incorporating appropriate rest and recovery? And are we educating these recruits or candidates or students on heat-related illnesses from the outset? And so just educating the students on the signs and symptoms and also putting together a comprehensive training program that makes sense and is also progressive can go a long way in mitigating the risk of these heat illnesses. The next thing is hydration. We have to emphasize adequate fluid intake before, during, and after training. Talk about it all the time. I know we cannot lead the horses to water, but as a coach, it is our responsibility to educate and remind and remind and remind and remind. If you ever find yourself defending yourself in a court of law, you will be able to say, yes, I educated the recruits or the students on hydration. I gave them water breaks. I encouraged them to drink water. I did not withhold water. You want to be able to say those things when you are on the stand testifying. We also have to be careful with acclimatization. So we want to do this gradually. And especially in Oklahoma, I think it's 106 degrees right now. It is brutal. I was out mowing my lawn. I thought I was going to die. But especially in hot weather, humid weather, we need to be very careful about introducing this heat challenge in a really systematic way. And then the other thing we have to look at is we have to monitor, we have to pay attention. And you can tell when people are getting hot and exhausted and dehydrated. So we need to make sure that we're intervening early and providing appropriate medical attention. And so that appropriate medical attention could be something as simple as you go get your water bottle and sit in the shade for a couple minutes. I'm going to come back and check on you. Or it could be we're taking heart rate, blood pressure, we're contacting EMS, we are getting this person taken care of. Because again, you don't want to be the person, the people that I'm going to talk about next. And so what we talked about heat exhaustion, heat cramps. We talked about all of those major and minor. The one thing that I didn't mention yet was rhabdo. And so the full word, rhabdomyolysis, it's a condition where we damage skeletal muscle tissue to the point where it starts breaking down and releasing its contents into the bloodstream. And it can lead to really serious complications, including kidney damage, including death. And so the way that one acquires rhabdo generally is a combination of very strenuous exercise, dehydration, heat stress, lack of previous training on the part of the recruit and on the part of the instructor or coach. And then sometimes there's underlying medical conditions that can play into this. And unfortunately, we don't necessarily know if someone has one of those underlying medical conditions. And so when I talk about rhabdo, I always say, rhabdo, it's no big deal, right? How about we don't? Because we need to take care of our populations. And so we think of these things and we think that's not going to happen to us. Never. It's not going to happen to us. And so I have a whole bunch of examples where it has happened. And so just a few weeks ago in Texas, this was Rockwell Heath High School, a cheerleader is suing 3 former teachers at the school who the cheerleader claims used excessive physical exercise as a punishment and led to her being hospitalized. And so this is not the first time it's happened in the school. And then the news article goes on to say the family was kind of shocked that it happened again. If you're going to do something and not learn from it, that means you're going to keep making the same mistake. According to the lawsuit, the 3 teachers forced the students in their cheerleading class to do 50 modified burpees, modified including a push-up, because they were unhappy with the students' performance. One of the students reportedly suffered exertional rhabdo because of the punishment. And she actually had a note from her doctor saying that she shouldn't be doing exercise that particular day for some unrelated reason. And she was still doled out this punishment. And so you think, okay, that's cheerleading. That's stupid. They don't know what they're doing. And so potentially that's not going to happen to me. So here's what you also need to understand. In the spring, 9 members of the Tufts University men's lacrosse team were hospitalized, and they were hospitalized due to a punishment-style workout that was administered by a former graduate who happened to have just completed Navy SEAL training. Now, what you need to know is, again, unidentified Navy SEAL, and he was invited to lead a workout session. He had previously been the equipment manager for the lacrosse team. He wasn't even a lacrosse player, but he had been the equipment manager. The report found that while the workout plan inspired by his own Navy SEAL training had been approved by the Tufts Director of Sports Performance, no other members of the athletics department were advised on the contents of the session. The investigation found that the workout had focused almost exclusively on upper extremity muscle groups, and by some accounts had athletes performing about 250 burpees and other exercises over the course of the hour-long session. And so you think, well, That's just a silly kid who graduated, went to Navy SEAL training, and came back and did a Punisher workout for the lacrosse team at a university. Well, a former Florida State strength coach was fired in a civil case. He left in 2017. He was at that time at Oregon, left 3 players hospitalized. And again, they suffered from rhabdo due to the intensity of the session. Per the CDC, in this news article, it's a serious medical condition that can be fatal or result in permanent disability. Rhabdo occurs when damaged muscle tissue releases its proteins and electrolytes into the blood, and it can cause damage to the kidneys, heart, permanent disability, or even death. So that is Division I sport. So it happened in high school cheerleading. It happened at Tufts University in the lacrosse. It happened in Division I football. And you think, but it doesn't happen in police, fire, and military. Well, you would be wrong, because in this particular article, his name was Mr. Moses. And unfortunately, I'm looking at slides and my notes are not lining up with the slides, but I believe this was Police Academy. He was found to not be able to stand up or walk, and he had been knocked unconscious. The police trainers and those observing, with the paramedics' blessing, ordered the drill to continue and proceeded to the wrestling component. At that time, Mr. Moses was helpless on his back, totally incapacitated and unable to defend himself. He could not even move to the next station. They brought the station to him. When his trainers and involved officers tried to stand him up, he fell down. From his assaults, he was then involuntarily in police custody, paramedic care, and in need of emergency hospitalization. Only upon his loss of consciousness again, which occurred 30 seconds or so into the 2-minute drill, did the paramedics finally decide to place him in the ambulance and go to the hospital. By then, he was receiving sterile rubs. Upon arrival, he was nearly dead. Numerous emergency surgeries saved his life, but the doctors were forced to amputate both of his legs below the knee. He went into a coma after collapsing during this training. He had rhabdo, complicated by compartment syndrome, acute kidney failure, and stress-related cardiomyopathy, which luckily all resolved. And so it's easy to say, well, that's the cops and they did something dumb. Well, I would like to draw to your attention in Austin, Texas. A third party is coming in to investigate the Austin Fire Department cadet training program following the death of a cadet and the hospitalization of another. 2 whistleblowers from different fire departments came forward to a news station in the wake of Devon Coney's recent death, encouraging them to take a closer look at the training academy. On the morning this happened, he was getting ready for his first day of cadet training with Austin Fire Department. Less than 1 hour into the training, he suffered an unknown medical emergency. He later died at the hospital, making him the first cadet to ever die on the job at the agency. But the news agency discovered that he wasn't the only cadet taken to the hospital that day. Multiple sources told the news agency, and AFD confirmed it. A second cadet was also sent to the hospital the same morning. They were both transported for rhabdo, and so on and so forth. And so I want to draw your attention to the fact that this was the kid's first day. And I already forgot what I said, but it sounded like it was only an hour or two into his first day. That's terrifying. So these cases are very specific to circumstances in each case, but they underscore my concerns with the following: training intensity. Some of these training programs are so overly strenuous that they increase by the way that these are set up, increase the chances of heat-related illnesses and rhabdo. And so we need to be careful. It underscores medical awareness. So instructors and staff have to be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of rhabdo and provide prompt prompt, underline and italic and bold and bigger font, prompt medical care. And then there's, this duty to act, duty for care. These lawsuits suggest that academies and their personnel have a duty to ensure the well-being of recruits during training. So as someone who's putting together an academy training program, it should be in the back of your mind at all times that fire departments and training academies have been negligent in their training practices and their supervision of programs, and these have led to injuries and sometimes death. We also need to be aware that there is a duty to warn. And so when we fail to warn, these lawsuits, many of them claim that the recruits were not adequately warned about the dangers of rhabdo. They weren't educated, and they weren't educated on the proper hydration and rest. Oof. Retaliation. Some of these cases actually involve retaliation against individuals who reported concerns about training practices and safety. And then we also always have to consider workers' compensation. So some of these cases will be pursued through your workers' compensation umbrella. And so once that happens, it's going to trigger a lot of questions about your academy. So if we recap some important points about heat-related illnesses, rhabdo, and just being a good dude, we need to think about this. We need to make sure that we're training properly. So our comprehensive training programs should gradually increase in intensity. They should incorporate appropriate rest and recovery and hydration. And we should be educating those recruits on heat-related illnesses. And we should be recognizing when someone's in distress. We need to make sure that we're emphasizing hydration, fluid intake before, during, and after training. Do not show up to my training ground dehydrated. And while you're at it, do not show up with an energy drink. I'll slap it out of your hand. We need to think about acclimatization. And so we need to gradually introduce this to the training environment, especially in hot weather. And that can help reduce the risk of these heat-related illnesses and rhabdo. We need to closely monitor those recruits during their training for signs of rhabdo. So muscle cramps, muscle pain, weakness. If they are, taking a bathroom break and their urine is very dark, especially if someone has a syncopal episode, we need to be intervening and taking care of these people. And again, early intervention. So prompt medical attention for any time we suspect rhabdo. One of the cases that I did not talk about, it was a few years ago, I believe it was football, and the athletic training staff and the strength and conditioning staff had someone who was, when you look at it, I don't like to be the armchair quarterback, but I'm going to. When you look at the accounts, you're like, how could they not recognize that this was a serious problem? Why were they not cooling this individual down? Why were they not hydrating? Why were they not calling 911 to get this person to the hospital? And the care was delayed, I believe, by half hour, 45 minutes or something like that. And the person's core temperature when they got to the hospital was astronomical. And I cannot remember if this person lived or died or whatever. But what I do remember is that the athletic training staff and the strength and conditioning staff and the coaching staff got in a lot of trouble, civil lawsuits. So keep that in mind. I want to transition to, I don't want you to think that I don't believe firefighters should be in their gear. I 100% believe firefighters should be training in their gear, but I believe they should be doing job-specific tasks in their gear. And so, we talk about exercise, and then we talk about performance training. To me, exercise, again, random acts of fitness, going to a Zumba class, riding your bike, going out to the garage and doing a weight training session, hitting the Y for basketball. Those particular things are awesome. They'll help you get stronger. They'll help you build muscle. They will help you up your cardiovascular endurance, but they are not specifically performance-based training modalities for firefighting. And so when you are participating in performance-based training modalities, i.e. job task training, I sincerely believe that that's the time to put the gear on, not when you're playing volleyball with a 20-pound med ball. But here are my thoughts on gear-based training. The first one, they, in my opinion, should always be job task training related. They should never be regular PT sessions. And so in your head, I think if I would do this at the gym, then I should be in gym clothes. If I would do this on the fire ground, then it might make sense for me to have my structural firefighting gear on. I believe they should be very, very, very progressive in nature and slowly progress to get the proper acclimatization, especially in hot climates. And so what I did for the university is we started with just gloves. And I believe we only did 1 week with just gloves. And then we progressed it to gloves and bunker pants, but they had on their gym shoes. And so they had the added weight of the bunker pants. They had the heat, keeping the heat in with the bunker pants, but they still had their gym shoes on. The next week, we changed it to their gloves, their pants, and their boots, their bunker boots. The following week, they added on their hood. And then the following week, they added on their helmet. For some reason, and as a female with a skinny neck, I can relate. For some reason, adding on the helmet for them upped the ante big time. And so once we got to that point, gloves, pants, boot, hood, and helmet, then I only had them do a round or two with the helmet, and then I had them take the helmet off and finish the number of rounds that they were going to do. So this and all subsequent weeks, they were stripping off layers as they went through each subsequent round. So where were we? Gloves, pants, boots, hood, and helmet. Then we added on the coat. And then we added on the SCBA not on air. And then we added on the SCBA on air. So that was our final scenario where they had all of their gear on and they were on air. Now, keep in mind, this was the summer. This was a very short academy. It was only 10 weeks. And I think I only had them for fitness for about 8 of those 10 weeks. And so I didn't have a chance to get them multiple weeks on air, multiple reps with all of their gear on. But we had no heat-related illnesses, absolutely no rhabdo. We did have to call EMS for one person one time. He admitted to me that he had not hydrated properly, and he was also not one of the fit students in the class. But the big picture for this is we have to be carefully monitoring them for heat distress. We have to give them mandatory water breaks, and they're not optional. Go get a drink and peel off your layer, take a short break, and then go again. So by being cognizant and by paying attention, I think we alleviated any risk for a heat-related illness. So if we find when we're monitoring any student who is struggling to the point where they look ill, I did have to pull a student off early. We didn't call EMS or anything like that. I just pulled him off early because he was green. He did not look good. So if they look like they're struggling, they look like they're ill, they need to sit down, or they look like they need to sit down, or if they voice their stress, I pull them from the tasks. I have them dress down, hydrate, and evaluate them. Right now, I know that probably some of you are like, yeah, but they're gonna pretend so that they can duck out early, or yes, that happens, and we have to know our students and we have to know how we can push them. But if you push the wrong student and you are not monitoring them for distress and they get a heat-related illness, rhabdo or worse, are you going to be able to sit in front of a judge and jury and say, I was doing the right thing. And I think that that's really important. Whew, if you need a break, right now would be a good time to press pause and go get yourself some water, hydrate, because we're moving on to a new topic. We're moving on to tissue tolerance. Here's the thing. Muscle adapts fairly quickly. So we impose a demand on muscle and it's like, hey-oh, okay, we know what we're doing. The nervous system adapts fairly quickly. The muscle adapts fairly quickly. But what does not adapt quickly are tendons and ligaments. And because of the way the human body's put together, most of the non-traumatic, so the overuse injuries that we see, tend to occur near that muscle tendon junction. And many times we see tendon injuries, not necessarily muscle injuries, because tendons do not adapt as quickly as muscle. So we have to keep that in mind. We can't push people towards adaptation just because we said so. We can't get an adaptation just because we said so. Physiology gets a vote. So we want to make sure we're using the principles of progressive overload. And when we want to do this safely, we can think about it in a lot of ways, because many times we just think about it in terms of how much load we have and then how many sets and reps. And then we don't think about anything else. But we do need to think about the load, and we want to be able to gradually increase that resistance. And I didn't say weight because what if you're using a band? So we're gradually increasing the resistance or the difficulty or the challenge to the muscles and the energy systems. That's the load, or you can think about it as intensity. So we at the OSU OKC Fire Academy really couldn't increase the weight of an exercise, with very few minor exceptions. Some of the sandbags, I think the instructors were drunk when they filled up the sandbags, because some of them are very heavy and some of them are quite light. But with the exception of grabbing a little bit heavier sandbag, the only thing that we could load differently or alter the load was by doing things like altering our stance or doing unilateral exercises. And so instead of a 2-arm sandbag row, we could do a 1-arm sandbag row. Instead of a regular stance squat, so we're all squared up nice and pretty, we could do a kickstand squat where we offset one of those feet. It changes the loading just a little bit. But in terms of going in an 80-pound sandbag, 100-pound sandbag, we just couldn't. So that's load or intensity. We can change the volume. So we can increase the number of sets or reps or total workload over time. That would be our volume. We can change our frequency. So how often are we doing sessions, or how often are we hitting a specific muscle group? Put a pin in it, you guys. What is up with firefighters not realizing they have a posterior chain? I've been looking at some programs that firefighters have shown me that they've been, whether they wrote it up on the chalkboard, whether they saw online and they grabbed it, and it's like chest, 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 shoulder, 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 biceps and triceps. They don't forget the triceps, but some lower body, usually squats. But I'm like, where is the pulling? Where are the pull-ups and the rows, the renegade rows? Where are the RDLs? Where are the deadlifts? Y'all, if we don't train some posterior chain, you're going to have FLASS. FLASS. Flat ass. And we want to make sure we have balance in our muscle groups. So if you're telling me that your back is killing you or whatever's killing you, and you do 0 posterior chain training, maybe y'all should start. Check out your flasses in the mirror. Where was I? Frequency. Duration. We can make that training session longer. Having an hour training session is pretty arbitrary. By the time you warm up and do a few sets and cool down and stretch, yeah, it's usually right about an hour, but it doesn't have to be. It can be 45 minutes. It can be 90 minutes. Changing the duration is going to change the demands. We can also change the exercise complexity. So from more basic movements, we can go from, say, a 2-leg sandbag RDL. Then we can switch it to a kickstand, so one foot offset behind the other, but it's still two legs, RDL. We can then switch it to a one leg, RDL, potentially putting us on an unstable surface. Maybe we take off our socks and then we stand on the defensive tactics training mats, and so it's squishy and we have to fight falling over. So those are different ways to change exercise complexity. We can change the rest intervals. And so instead of changing the difficulty by making the resistance greater or more sets, we could give less rest. Put another pin in it. Side note, I don't think he listens to the podcast, but I had a coworker, his name was Josh, and I called him Rungo Smash for a reason. He was a great person to have on your crew, especially on the truck, because all I would have to say is I just look at him and say, Rungo Smash, and he would just smash the living heck out of whatever needed to be smashed, whether it was the car door or the roof or whatever. But I made the mistake of agreeing to work out with Rungo one day, and he put together a circuit training workout for us. Dude gave us no rest. It was one exercise to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, like 8 exercises, back to the top, start over again. I'm like, dude, where is the rest? How are we going to get adaptations when you're not giving me any rest? That might have been the last time I worked out with Rungo Smash. We can also address speed and tempo. So we can go slower. We can go faster. We can emphasize the concentric part of the exercise. So the concentric part of a bicep curl would be the up portion. We can emphasize the eccentric portion. So with that particular exercise, that would be the down portion. Same thing on a push-up. So eccentric is when we're lowering ourselves. Concentric is when we're pushing ourselves up. We can also weaponize isometric. And so we did some types of isometric exercises in the training academy. We did some pull-up holds. We did some wall sits. We did some split squat holds and things like that. So next we're going to hit my programming philosophy, and I probably should have made this 3 parts, but I'm not going to do it. We're going to barrel through and we're going to finish today. My programming philosophy is just one approach. This is just one way to do it. But I think it works pretty well in police, fire, and military. First and foremost, we always warm up. And I use the RAMP protocol, RAMP. So raising the body temperature, getting a little warm and sweaty, activating the muscle groups, in particular, the ones that tend to not be very active, mobilize and potentiate. So about 10 minutes total is what we do. And my dude Hunter always said this, and I really liked it. He always said, are we warming up or are we working out? Because it should flawlessly transition from warm up to workout. Now, it's a little bit tougher at my training academy. Usually we would warm up outside. So it was very clear, okay, go inside, get a drink and get your sandbag. But for the most part, if you can transition flawlessly from warming up to working out, that is amazing. In the warm-up, we should have general and specific components. So the general components are just increasing our core temperature, getting us our blood flowing, getting our nervous system awakened, like, hey, we're going to work out, getting nutrients, oxygen, waste removal, everything, the delivery system online. And then when we talk about specificity, the specific warm-up, we are increasing neuromuscular efficiency. And so, for example, practicing during the warm-up torso rotation, if we are going to be forcing the doors either during the training session, the PT session, or during the actual academy skills task portion of the day. So I tend to, within the specific parts of the warm-up, I try to think ahead to what we're doing for the day and sort of address those areas. I also always remember to address all 3 planes of motion, because we are pretty good in the sagittal plane, forward and backward. That is running. That is almost everything we do is in the sagittal plane. We do a little bit in the frontal plane, the side to side movements, i.e. in the warm up, that would be something like shuffling and karaoke or lateral lunges, but we do not do enough in the transverse plane. Those are the rotational movements that I talked about earlier. That's the plane we tend to get hurt in. And so we need to address all three of those planes during the warm up. And so let's go back to the ramp protocol. It can be things such as walking a lap, running a lap, jump roping with your pretend, emotional support jump rope. We could do a lateral and front and back, like little tiny bunny hops, sort of a jump rope. We could do jumping jacks and cross country ski. Oh, I just learned something at the police academy this week. They are called side straddle hops. I looked at my colleague and I'm like, what is a side straddle hop? Well, I found out 5 seconds later when they started to do jumping jacks. Then we can look at things like walking our toes, walking on our heels, just things that are going to get our body temperature up a little bit. Then we look at activation, and activation for me are things like bridges, things like bottoms up split squats. I don't love walking lunges in a warm up because I think so many people do them poorly. But I think if you can do a good set of bottom up split squats, that's a pretty good activation. Even things like planks and potentially dead bugs, we're sending the message, hello, we are getting ready to work out. So that's the activate. Mobilize, for me, I use things that focus on moving the T-spine, so mobility in the T-spine, the hips, and the ankles. So that could look anything like I do a thing called over and under the hurdle. So you pretend it's a high hurdle. And so you have to step up and over it and then pretend just next to it there's another hurdle. So you have to crouch down and go under it. Things such as walking ankle grabs, walking knee hugs, walking knee cradles. Those types of things I think are great to put in the mobilized portion. And then when we talk about potentiating, that's when I do low-level plyometrics. And so that could be not getting crazy, but it could be jump squats. It could be skipping, hopping, bounding, broad jumping, any sort of low-level plyometrics, even plyometric push-ups if you have a place that you can do it safely where someone's not going to eat gravel. Those types of things work. But these things put together take about 10 minutes. I don't do static stretching at all until the end. So I make sure that we address those muscle groups that we worked at the end. Okay, we're almost done, guys. I schedule or base my sessions around fundamental movement patterns that are so simple. Push and pull, so that's upper body push and pull. Lower body hinge and squat, carry heavy stuff, and then core / mobility / stability drills as fillers in between the strength movements. And I have found that if we pair pushing and squatting, so upper body, and basically those are upper body and lower body pushing patterns, and then pulling and hinging, so upper and lower body pulling patterns, if we pair those together and then make sure that we're sprinkling in mobility, core, stability drills in between those exercises, and also doing some sort of a metabolic style finisher at the end, I have found that it's pretty magical. It keeps people's attention, and most importantly, we're checking the boxes of the things that we're trying to accomplish. And then I just wanted to say one more time I would implore you to only incorporate gear for job-specific task simulations, not for general fitness training. And so this has been part 2 of developing an Academy PT program. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your comments. Send me an email at info@firerescuewellness.org. If, I'm not really excited about developing academy fitness programs for other people, but if you are dead set on paying someone to develop your program, I would be happy to help. Just hit me up with an email. And I think that's it. It's been AZ. Stay well. Hey, it's AZ. Guess what? I forgot something. Shocker. I'm back. Just for a couple minutes though. When you're putting together your week, this is what worked really well for me. One session dedicated to the hinge and pull. One session dedicated to the squat and push. One session dedicated to running and mobility. One to sort of a total body circuit, and one to the job test circuits. And not necessarily in this order. It doesn't have to be in this order. It worked pretty well for me to be in this order, but especially the job test circuits, I think doing those on Friday or before they have a couple of days off works really well. And then sprinkling in, so think of those as the cupcakes and the frosting. These are the sprinkles. Sprinkling in speed and power and change of direction training, eccentric training, so that deceleration, low-level plyometrics. We already did some in the warm-up potentially, but maybe some more before the actual training session starts, and then programming in those carries. And so for me, that worked fabulously. We also used something called ability-based training. And probably you might say, hey, what? Well, we used a time-based ability training. And so they were doing as many reps as possible within the amount of time that I allotted. So if I told them they had a minute to do as many squats as they could, obviously the people that are more fit are going to get more squats done than the people that are less fit. But everybody ends at the same time and they get either the same amount of rest or they go on to another exercise. And so somebody asked, if you're going to have them do it a minute, why don't you just have every minute on the minute and they're supposed to be doing 10? Wouldn't that be easier to monitor? Well, think about the problem though. The more fit individuals are going to complete their reps and have a lot of rest time, and they're not going to be very challenged, whereby the less fit individuals are going to get less rest. Maybe they barely eke out their 10 repetitions in that minute. That's kind of exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying. They barely get done, and now, boom, that clock goes off again, and they have to do their 10 reps again. So I think this ability-based training seems to work best when we have things like sandbags or whatever, and we cannot change the weight significantly for different people's level of ability. Okay, for real, I'm done this time. Have a great week.